Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Pahang is the most forested state in Peninsular Malaysia. But one of the most concerning issues, concerning losses is in the Bukit Ibam Forest Reserve in Pahang, of which 85 square kilometres have been carved out for a plantation project. This is the single largest forest reserve loss in Pahang in the last 2 decades. So tonight on the show, we'd like to look at what's happening there, but not just the environmental impact of the deforestation projects like the one in Bukit Ibam, but also how projects like those displaces indigenous people who have lived there for many years. Let's begin the show now with Dr. Law Yao Hua. He's a science journalist for Makaranga, which is a portal covering issues of the environment and sustainability in Malaysia. And he's also been recently named as a fellow in the first cohort of the Pulitzer Center's Rainforest Investigations Network. Yao Hua, good evening and congratulations on the fellowship. If I may begin our conversation tonight, Yao Hua, with referencing that piece that you wrote that was published in the Southeast Asia Globe. And it talked a little bit about this deforestation project in Pahang, which you argue has exacerbated the long-standing struggle for Orang Asli customary land rights. I'm just wondering, Yao Hua, how the issue at Kampung Berengkoi, how the events there came to your attention. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you came across the story and a little bit about what's happening there?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Mel and Sharaad. So a conservationist, sort of like what's at me, the cover page of the environmental impact assessment report of this project, right? There's an EIA report that was submitted by the developer sometime in April, and it was in late May that I came upon this EIA and I looked it up, and I just, because I'm investigating forest use and forest plantations, and this project has a forest plantation component, so I just looked into the EIA, and it was a thick EIA, but there was I noticed some discrepancies between what the Orang Asli survey shows and the consent letters on the other hand. So I just hounded on this discrepancy, and then I investigated further. So,
Yeah. Before we get into the EIA, because this the acronym gets bandied about every time we talk about the environment. It's not always reassuring that there's an EIA involved. But that aside, could you help us understand what's really at stake in this particular case that you're looking at?
Right. Yeah. So as you introduced right at the start, this is happening in Pahang, in what was once the Bukit Ibam Forest Reserve. What's at stake? Well, the forest itself is at stake, right? So this is a huge site. This whole project site is 85 kilometers square. So to give an idea, that's like if this is a rectangle, then you will go 8.5 kilometers one way and 10 kilometers another way. That becomes a rectangle. That's the size of this site. Now, this is primary forest. It's not pristine forest because this forest was last logged about 25 to 30 years ago, but it has since become regenerated into a really mature, ecologically healthy forest with lots of animals. But now this project, is going to clear this whole site and convert it into oil palm and a timber plantation.
Could you just very quickly elaborate a little bit what you mean by primary forest as opposed to pristine forest, just so that I have an understanding of this piece of land and how ecologically valuable this area is as it sits within the Bukit Ibam Forest Reserve? Right.
Okay. So usually when we just to make clear, we don't have to talk about the science part of it, right? When we talk about Taman Negara, like the core of Taman Negara would be, I guess, pristine forest, untouched, never logged, never disturbed. That's pristine, as primary as you can get. What I meant by primary forest just now really refers to a state of a forest that you expect that if it has not been touched for the last 20 years, not logged, not touched, not disturbed for the last 20 years, then you expect to see tall trees, trees taller than 20 meters, thick trees, high diversity, lots of animals living in there. And in this specific forest, there have been sightings of tapirs, sun bears, gibbons, endangered animals like that, also elephants, and also suggestions that there were or there still are tigers in the vicinity.
Yeah, who are the stakeholders in this, and how did you kind of plot out, the various stakeholders and their relative strengths in determining the fate of this part of the forest in Pahang?
The stakeholders of this site, you mean?
Yes.
Right.
So
okay.
Well, the business of the state and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, so of course there's a developers, right? The site itself actually now belongs to this company called YP Oleo, and they own the site on a 99-year lease from the state government. So on one hand, of course, ultimately the owner of the land is the state government, the Pahang state government. So that's one stakeholder. They have leased it to a company called YP Oleo. That's the second stakeholder who now wants to develop it into a plantation. And then of course there are the people staying on the land now, the Orang Asli, at least 8 families of Orang Asli in 2 villages. So that's the third stakeholder. And of course, you can think of all the other neighboring villages who will be affected, who might be affected. So those are the other stakeholders here. The other businesses that will come in, the loggers themselves will come in. Those are another stakeholders too. Yeah. And of course, if you take a bigger view, then of course the whole Pahang and the whole Malaysia are all sharing in these resources, and they are all stakeholders.
Right. Okay. Let's focus on one of the stakeholders, which is the indigenous community Orang Asli, who will be displaced for this project. But before we get into that, I'm curious because you talked about the state government as a stakeholder, and I'm just wondering, because there have been concerns recently raised over the spate of mining projects being proposed in forest reserves in Pahang, for instance, in the Tasik Chini and in some forest reserve. I'm just wondering what has been your what the research has shown you about Pahang state government's approach towards legislation, regulation, towards forestry policy.
This is a huge question, actually. I would say if we just look at the numbers of, in terms of areas of forest reserve, Pahang is definitely the state with the most forest reserve in Peninsular Malaysia. And in terms of de-gazetting or removing forest reserve, among the top forested states, I think Pahang can claim to be doing really well. Because they very often replace the forest reserves that they have removed. So that's great. And the state of Pahang does have, the forestry is certified, the sustainable logging is certified under the Malaysian Timber Certification Scheme. So that's great. So there are things to be praised and to be appreciated about how Pahang is running its forestry. On the other hand, we should also note that in the last 10 years, Pahang has lost a net loss of about 15,600 hectares of forest reserve. So it has not been able to replace as much as it has removed. And of course, it's debatable how much is enough as forest reserve. But that's a big question. I mean, there's something that Pahang has done right, and I would say better than many of the other states. But I'm sure conservationists will say there are lots more to be improved.
Yeah. One of the things that your excellent article points to is the issue of customary land and the extent to which there's recognition of Orang Asli communities and their title, as it were, to the land, their guardianship of the land. How does that play out in this particular case that you've been researching?
In this case, the land, so there are 2 Orang Asli villages in the site itself, and the villagers have claimed about 4,000 hectares, so say like almost half of the whole project site. They have claimed this site, half of this site as their customary territory in 2017. So they actually map it out, right? But that claim has not been recognized by the state government. What does that mean? I mean, if this is the Orang Asli's, they call it Aboriginal reserves or reserve for land, then you cannot just take it out of from their hands. You even if you displace them, even if you ask them to move out the area, you have to compensate them properly. And there's a lot more protection for the orang asli who live and use Aboriginal reserves and area compared to the two kampungs now, Kampung Masau and Kampung Berenggoy, who are not living on state recognized customary land. And so as happened here, the state has leased the land, their land on which they're staying, to this other company, right? And I'm not even sure that the Orang Asli knew what actually happened. When I approached them in early June, they were so surprised to learn what has happened. Yeah, but we must also realize that as we speak, the forest around Kampung Berenggoy has been cleared, right? It has already been cleared. So about maybe 30% of the project site has already been cleared, and only the remaining maybe 70% is still forest. Yeah.
Yao Hua, what recourse do the Orang Asli have? Because it's not just where they live, but it's also their livelihoods, and also customs and their way of life is threatened. What do you understand to be any form of dispute resolution or recourse that they might be able to take?
I'm no expert in this. I spoke to experts like Dr. Colin Nicholas, who I think you might be speaking to later, and some lawyers, right? And they suggested that in this case, the Orang Asli have a strong case to make. They have to prove that they've been living and using the land for some time, a long time, and then they can go to court. So that to bring this to the court, they have to fight it out, in the courts, basically. Who are they going to sue? I'm not going to comment on that. I don't really know who they should sue, but that's something they can do. And certainly they have the Orang Asli, the afflicted Orang Asli, have just lodged a police report on this whole incident. They didn't know about what had happened, right? And after this story, after I had done the report, so then they realized, and then they have lodged a police report. So they are taking actions to, yeah.
Right. Yeah. One last quick question. You say land has already been cleared. How much damage does that represent? And what's the long-term future if projects like this already begin to clear land?
Well, there's lots of potential impact. What's the exact impact already? I can't tell. I mean, the Orang Asli told me that already their farms and their ancestral graves have been damaged. But in terms of environmental impact, I do not know. I've not seen the documents to show that. But the EIA report itself warns of river pollution, noise pollution, of course wildlife impact. All the animals that used to live there will have to go somewhere else, even if there's enough place to go to, and you will get where will the elephants go. This piece of forest is sort of like the heart of a hub that connects. Animals could actually move from Taman Negara all the way down to Endau Rompin through this piece of forest. With this center heart piece gone, it really raises the question of, are those animals then able to move through this? It really brings into question like how effective our national policy of the Central Forest Spine is in maintaining the integrity of our forest landscape. Yeah.
All right. Yao Hua, thank you so much for speaking to us tonight and for bringing these issues to our attention. Appreciate your work. That was Law Yao Hua from Macaranga speaking to us. After this, we're going to be speaking to the Centre for Orang Asli Concerns to find out how deforestation has impacted Indigenous communities. So more on that in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned to Consider This. thanks so much for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. Let's continue our look at how deforestation not only results in biodiversity loss, but also displaces indigenous communities and threatens their way of life. Dr. Colin Nicholas is the coordinator of the Centre for Orang Asli Concerns. He joins us on the show now. Colin, thank you for being joining us on the show tonight. Can I begin our conversation by asking you to explain a little bit about what you understand to be the issues faced by the Orang Asli community at Kampung Ibam in Pahang?
Well, basically, as the case is all Orang Asli in Malaysia, including in Pahang, it's a case of non-recognition, not the rights to customary lands. You know? If you don't recognize your traditional rights to the lands, then you can do whatever you want because you consider it a state land or a land for which it's at your disposal to be given out to anybody you want.
Colin, we understand, though, that even in the state of Pahang, customary land has been recognized. Perhaps not all the land that has been claimed, but some of it. Could you help us understand why some land is recognized and why other parts of territory that are claimed are not recognized? What are the dynamics there? What are the determinants of a recognition of customary land?
From the state's perspective, from the government's perspective, first of all, look at the statistics. You know? So far, 7,156 hectares in the whole of Pahang have been gazetted and is recognized as Orang Asli land by the state government, gazetted as Orang Asli reserves. And there are 260 villages in the whole of Pahang, Orang Asli villages, with a population of about 70,000 Orang Asli. So 70,000 Orang Asli in 260 villages get 7,156 hectares. This one company in one area in Pahang gets 8,500 hectares. You see the irrationality of it all. So why does it happen? The reality is that the lands in which Orang Asli live on today, which they have been living on for a long time, are now the frontier lands, the lands which are most valuable, with the most valuable resources, timber and so on, minerals, and they are the lands which are now being sought after by almost everybody, from individuals to corporations to even the palace, you know, for lands which are valuable in terms of what it has on it and what it can be done with.
Right. So, Colin, these lands that are sought after, these areas that are sought after, you know, how have some communities responded to land grabbing? I mean, there are some communities that have tried to resist, while others remain passive. It's not homogeneous. What do you understand to be the difference?
Well, we have one major successful case where the Orang Asli fought against the state and the authorities over the land grabbing attempt. This is Kampung Bera and Kampung Ibam in Kampung Bukit Rock and Kampung Ibam in Bera district, where about 5,000 acres were claimed by the Orang Asli, but was taken away by the government, saying it was Malay reserve land, and not just Malay reserve land, but it was Malay reserve land since 1927. But because of evidence provided by the Orang Asli, because of testimony and all this, and the whole long process of going through the court, the judge ruled in the end that the creation of the Malay reserve land in 1927 did not extinguish the native title rights of the Orang Asli under common law. And the direction of the court was to cancel the Malay reserve land, replace it with equal land somewhere else, and regard the Orang Asli land as customary lands of the Orang Asli, and to be gazetted as Orang Asli reserve. So there is already a very strong precedent in Pahang to recognize the customary lands of the Orang Asli under native title. No? And even though they don't have any title or grants by the government itself. But unfortunately, the government in Pahang, as well as other state governments, are not recognizing this decision as a precedent and using it as a way forward for which all lands which are being claimed by Orang Asli are to be regarded.
Colin, is the fight now essentially a legal one, as you just explained? Are there other ways in which the community resist or concede in their attempts to preserve their heritage and the environment in which they live?
Yes, the court is always the last resort. Nobody wants to go to court, especially the Orang Asli, because the process is such a long one, expensive one, and a lot of work involved, and you're not guaranteed of the decision. Secondly, the orang asli would prefer to do other methods, other means of conflict resolution. And in two cases that I know of, Kampung Seremai and Kampung Mengkapo, they've actually taken the case to court, but by way of arbitration and so on, they come to some kind of agreement with the state government to how much to recognize and how much for orang asli to give up and so on. So there is a compromise. And the same thing also happened in Kelantan, where after the orang asli had won the case in the High Court, the state government and the orang asli came to again another compromise and came up with a consent order, judgment order to say how the land is to be used, and how lands are to be protected by the state as forest reserves and so on. So there are ways of going around it. The court is just the last resort. The thing that's missing in most cases is the lack of political will, the lack of the political gumption to do what is right.
Well, and why is that? Is that just because they don't understand what is happening to orang asli communities when there are land grabbing attempts, or is it because this is an important voter base? What is stopping or hindering the political will?
We had the wrong people in power. Simple as that. And as a result of that, it's a case of it's not a case of coming up with a comfortable life for yourself or whatever.
But Colin, Pakatan Harapan, when they were in power, they said that they would address orang asli welfare. But was anything done during the 22 months?
Yes and no. During the Pakatan Harapan government, we had the Menteri Besar of Perak coming up with statements saying that there's no such thing as tanah adat or adat lands, for the orang asli because it's not in the constitution or in the law. Such absurd statements coming from a Pakatan Harapan state leader, even though there is a court case that's been judged in his own state, Perak, that in favor of the orang asli, similar to the Bukit Rock case just now. So it's not a case of the government which comes to power. It's the people, the kind of people in the government. So in the Selangor government, for example, in 2008, when the Pakatan Keadilan coalition came to power, with people like Elizabeth Wong there with the right orientation towards orang asli rights, there were decisions made like, getting orang asli themselves to find out which areas and how much areas to be gazetted, mapping out their own areas, putting a moratorium on logging and so on. So it's not so much as which government is in power, it's who is in the government.
Colin, is it largely a question of money? I know the state, depends a lot on resources from revenues from land. Is that one of the driving forces behind deforestation and willful ignorance or marginalization of orang asli concerns?
It's one of the weakest arguments that I ever heard coming from anybody from power. So if you look at the correlation of all the most poorest states in Malaysia, Sabah, Sarawak, Pahang, Kelantan, are the states where you have the most logging. Yet the logging is not saving them, saving the state, bringing the people out of poverty. In Kelantan, during the 2 weeks of the blockade season, in 2016, the loggers were complaining that in that 2 weeks they lost 50 million ringgit in logging profits. And for the whole year, the Kelantan government royalty from the state from logging was 157 million. 2 weeks in one small area, the loggers lose 50 million. 1 whole year in the whole state of Kelantan, they only get 150 million. What are you talking about? There's a lot of leakages in logging.
Yeah, so you're saying that actually the state isn't getting as much from this as would justify their siding with the loggers. Okay.
Exactly, because of the leakages, and it becomes such a profitable and very important source of excessive profits, not abnormal profits for the parties involved. The loggers are just the last people in the queue.
Can I ask you, Colin? I mean, you've been looking at this for a while, and you've been fighting for change. And I'm wondering what it is that you would like to see happen. You talk about the customary land rights and the need for it to be addressed, but specifically, what are some of the changes, the policy changes that you would like to see happen?
The first step is to recognize orang asli as the indigenous peoples of Malaysia, as the orang asal. Because when you have that kind of recognition, then they are entitled to all the rights which are written in the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, for example, and there are a lot of protections, including not only to their lands and resources, but also to their cultures, their languages, their identity, and so on. Much like how you recognize the Malays as the people, the politically dominant people of Malaysia, or the indigenous peoples of Malaysia, because of that recognition, they have rights to Malay reserve land, they have rights to political dominance and quotas here and quotas there, and so on. It's because orang asli are not regarded in any way near what we have, the kind of recognition for other communities. They are treated as footballs, they can be just kicked around because they know they are a small number, a dispersed number, and they can be easily bullied.
And how do we get there? How do we get that recognition? What is required?
Well, the two parties involved here. One is the orang asli themselves. They have to get their act together. They have to be united, because it's easy to put off fires here and there by the state, by the government. If the people are not united, and one thing, there's no one united front among the orang asli that can challenge and come up with all kinds of policy reforms and so on. And secondly, we need the public to realize that the orang asli do not want sympathy. They want empathy. They want understanding that it is a right that is being denied of them, and it is because of the orang asli that we still have forest areas and green areas in the country. If you do a correlation, you look at a map of where the orang asli are living today in Peninsular Malaysia, and you look at the areas of forest which are still existing, you find a very high correlation. And simply because, as everybody has been saying these days, the orang asli are the guardians of the environment, of the forest, of nature.
All right,
so the
Colin, thank you.
Recognize that. Yeah.
All right, Colin, thank you so much for speaking with us. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. That is all we have for this episode of Consider This. But before we leave you tonight, don't forget that you can get the latest information on COVID-19 vaccines on astroawani.com, as well as the Astro Awani app. Thank you so much for watching the show. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Have a lovely evening and good night.
Night.